Have you ever been to an operating session on a model railroad or wondered what they're like? This is Burr Stewart, and welcome to part 80 of my continuing series of model railroad operations videos. Today's video is a long one. It's highlights from 3 different operating sessions that I held recently, and we're going to run a number of trains that you've probably seen me describe in earlier videos on this channel. So I hope you'll enjoy it. For example, here we see the jet job coming out of the Ave Branch where the Boeing factory is. And then here, of course, is the main Interbay yard with a southbound train full of lumber from British Columbia. And here's a switcher on the other side of Interbay, shoving cars in and out of tracks and trying to get different trains prepared and ready to leave. And so we'll show a lot of that in sometimes painful detail, but I'll try to make it go quickly when it's possible. So here we start with an overview of the first session of 3. And you can see a train is departing the Interbay yard. And that train would appear to be the Ballard switch job, otherwise known as the Ballard Local. You can see it coming around the corner through the Salmon Bay Bridge, bridge number 4, across the Salmon Bay, the Lake Washington Ship Canal, and it's heading along Seaview Avenue Northwest in Ballard, and it's preparing to back down onto the Fremont Branch. You could call it the Ballard Branch or anything else you want to call it. It used to be the NP mainline all the way out to Snohomish, but it got gradually abandoned, and at this time it's mostly the Burke-Gilman Trail, which is a bicycle trail. But the first few miles of it are still to this day in service for Salmon Bay Sand and Gravel and several other manufacturers, Lakeside Industries, another gravel or cement plant. And so we still run it. I mean, of course, we're modeling 1973, so it was quite active at that time. We have about 10 industries in there. And this is a backing maneuver, as you can see, because this has to come off the main line, back down that curved branch line, and down into Ballard.
Hold up there. Didn't realize you were there. Forgot to switch it out.
That brass caboose derailed at the crossing there, so he had to fix it up, put it back on the track. I edited that out for you. Speaking of editing, I'll do what I can to speed this video up, but I do want it to be a complete overview of 3 operating sessions, so we'll still have plenty of excitement. And speaking of excitement, there's a train coming around on the other main line across the Salmon Bay Bridge. See that? So this is an example of why it's fun to hold an operating session, because you have lots of trains running at the same time. In this case, we have the Ballard switch job, and we have some sort of a through freight train marching along the Golden Gardens Park area, just north of Ballard, with 3 Rainbow-era locomotives on the point, and plenty of Pacific Northwest types of loads in the train. As I mentioned, this video is the highlights of 3 different operating sessions, each about 4 hours long, that took place in the first week of February 2024. And there are a variety of characters that were operating on the layout, which you'll see. And there were between 10 and 12 people, in addition to me, occupying the basement for those 4 hours and trying to run the trains as well as they could. And you'll see all kinds of examples of that. upcoming.
So Burr just installed those squealers on the curve over there.
Oh yeah,
There's one here,
yeah.
and there's one right where.
I was over here last week to bring an ice doctor.
Oh.
He was demonstrating.
And this British locomotive of mine, it has on the trucks, it has a Hall effect sensor. So depending on the speed, it does it automatically.
Oh my God.
Which is pretty cool.
That's incredible.
On the left, you can see the car card boxes with packets of car cards clipped together with binder clips, and those are the trains in the upper staging yard there in Skycomish, where the truss bridge is. And we'll see a couple trains run out of there during this video. Now, let's go back to Interbay Yard for a minute. Here we have a train pulling out of Interbay with just one engine. So I'm not sure exactly what train this is or whether it was a switching maneuver. The two gravel cars, the hopper cars, indicate that it's come down from the Skycomish as well as the log cars. I think this is probably the Skycomish Local, or the Sky Local as it was called, having returned to Interbay and being switched out by that Jeep. I'll use a lot of railroad jargon in this video, but I hope to explain myself as much as possible. I've consolidated video footage from the 3 different operating sessions in kind of a jumble, just to give you an idea of what's involved in an operating session. So we're not paying too much attention to the time sequence of events, although we'll do our best. Now, in this case, a train has just come down from the north and is pulling into the main yard in Interbay. You can tell right away from the lumber that this is a train from Vancouver, British Columbia, and it will be dropping off cars here in Seattle and then heading all the way down to Stockton, California and beyond, possibly Los Angeles. You can see the British Columbia Railway car there from Canada, as well as Milwaukee Road and Great Northern box cars. All of these would have been involved in lumber service, as well as many other commodities. There was also quite a chemical business in Vancouver, so you see the tank cars here. They could be empties, or they also could be chemical loads of various kinds. The green car there is a thrall door car, which was all doors on each side, a little structurally challenging, but the idea was it would be easy to load. But they fell out of favor a long time ago. Hooker Chemical, of course, was all over the country, but it did have a plant in Tacoma, so we see quite a few of those cars here. And there's a story behind that log car, which I won't go into, except that the logs were burned, so it was salvaged logs from a fire that took place, a forest fire. We also have a tie treatment plant on the layout, so those untreated ties will go there eventually. And since we're modeling 1973, every train has a caboose. And there are some exceptions to that, but you'll be able to enjoy cabooses throughout this video.
You're going to be on main 2? You're all lined up for that when you get your warrant.
You'll notice 3 F45 locomotives waiting with their rotating beacon flashing and everything else for this train to get out of the way, which it now has. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if these engines rev up and continue along their journey with this coal train. Now, the unit coal train that we run, keep an eye out for it, because in other parts of the video, you'll see it in the top part of this scene there as it goes up towards the Bellingham staging yard. This is a northbound train from Portland up to, well, from Wyoming's Powder River Basin up to an export facility at Roberts Bank near the Canadian border. As I mentioned in my previous video, a short video, it's pretty mesmerizing to watch a unit coal train, and I kind of enjoy running it even though it doesn't stop to do any work on the railroad. You'll see a lot of switching in this video and people trying to organize car cards and that sort of thing. But a unit coal train like this is just a rail fanning opportunity to enjoy a long train and the layout itself. This train is 26 cars long and has those 3 F-45s that you saw hauling it. In an ideal world, I would have a film crew that was filming all sorts of aspects of the operation without being noticed or getting in the way. But in practice, I just put a little GoPro camera on the bridge over the yard here and moved it around a couple of times to get some different scenes. And then one of my operators brought his GoPro, so we have some shots from that. And I took a few shots with my iPhone. But basically, this is a suboptimal video presentation because we weren't deliberately videotaping every single movement. We were just sort of randomly monitoring the activity. So I'll do my best to explain what I can about what's happening. Now, a few minutes after that train departed Interbay, you can see here we have another train preparing to do something, but it turns out it was a runaway. So the yardmaster had to keep restraining it until the operator could get control of it on his throttle. And I wanted to show you this because this is the kind of thing that happens in an operating session, even though it's not planned or even expected. But it does happen that you get a runaway. You see he uncoupled the engines from the train to try to give himself a little bit more safety. And at some point here, he'll get it.
There you go. Okay, you can go to the house.
Well, there we go. It appears that that was a train that terminated in Interbay, and these two engines that were on the train need to be returned back to the roundhouse where they can be serviced. The roundhouse, of course, is off to the left there. We don't have room for the roundhouse itself, but we have 4 tracks that the engines can park on. And we have a little bit of an electrical glitch in that switch, which is another thing that happens in operating sessions. You discover that your track work isn't perfect. That engine is reappearing on a different track than it left on, and I edited the video so that we didn't have to wait for it, since I can't rotate the camera around after the fact. Looks like he's got his locomotive cleared into the engine house there, and we can see what happens next.
Okay.
Well, here's a funny thing. It appears that what happens next was that the operator was called on to use the same 2 engines to run a different train. So just as soon as he had sent it back to the roundhouse, he had to pull it out of the roundhouse and go get a different train. This sort of thing happens all the time. You think you have a good plan, and then the situation changes and you have to make a different plan.
You know what funky heated brake is? Huh? You know what funky heated brake is? At least on here.
See Point Roberts? Yeah. What does it say there? Yeah, you go to Bellingham, you go to the Point Roberts ramp. Now, how you can tell is this. This is the 3 tracks on top, and these are the 2 tracks down the ramp on this map. So that's the only way you can tell is to look at the map, and then it says Point Roberts. But I will put it on the train instructions because it should say that. I spent a lot of time as the layout owner explaining things to people that haven't been there very often or ever, and promising myself that I'll put more information in the train instruction cards, which sometimes happens. But in any event, it looks like these 2 locomotives we were watching are headed down the main line to the other end of the yard where they'll pick up a southbound train that will go out of sight from us, so we won't be able to look at it. But mainly I wanted you to see, if you look above on the 3rd deck, you can see our coal train that we watched a few minutes ago heading up into Bellingham staging. And that's kind of cool, even though we don't have a camera up there. Now for our next activity, it looks like we have a long set of locomotives with an F unit on the front coming out of the engine terminal, probably to pull a mainline train out of the yard. And you see he's tapping on a set of cars. He's probably indicating that's the track that they wants him to pick up on. You're starting to get an idea of what an operating session is like. It's fairly slow moving and fairly complicated because you have to figure out which engines are going to pull which train to which town at what time in front of or behind which other train. And it's all quite a lot of fun with the 10 people or 12 people in the room all trying to figure out who's doing what. I recommend it highly if you ever get a chance to attend an operating session. You won't regret it. You'll notice a few people in the operating sessions wearing masks, including me. These were held in early February 2024, which was the height of the flu season. I had just recovered from a cold a few days earlier, so I didn't want to give it to anybody in the basement. I also have something called a Corsi box, which is a big air filter contraption running in the middle of the room, which isn't shown on any of the videos, but we were trying to keep the air in the basement reasonably clean with 12 people all breathing it. Now that is one nice consist there, 4 engines, and they have paint jobs from all of the predecessor railroads of the Burlington Northern. See, we were right when he was tapping on those cars. He was telling the operator to pull down and latch onto them. I'm sure you're familiar already with the fact that 1973 is a great time to model the Burlington Northern Railroad because it took them 7 years after the 1970 merger to repaint all the locomotives. So I'm able to have all sorts of different locomotives here and enjoy them. It's called the Rainbow Era of the railroad, and we really have a lot of fun with it. The same is true of the cabooses. There were quite a few cabooses that were not repainted for many years, and they have Burlington Northern numbers on them, many of them. You'll also notice that Southern Pacific locomotive in the engine terminal. That would have been a pool locomotive that came up from California. Portland really was the northern terminus of the Southern Pacific, but they would run some of the through trains up to Seattle and then turn around and come back. And if you look hard enough, you can find pictures of Southern Pacific locomotives in the Interbay engine terminal. One of my favorite things about DCC videos, see the caboose moving there along with the engines? Of course, with DCC, you can run any engine on any track at any time in any direction. And we have quite a few examples of that in today's video. as well as in general. So looking at the engines, we have that Northern Pacific F unit, the BN painted F unit, the Great Northern Simplified scheme, and the original Great Northern diesel paint scheme, all represented in that one consist of locomotives. Pretty cool. This is clearly a northbound train going to Vancouver, although I don't know why the lumber loads are wrapped there. But see the flat car, the Burlington truck trailer on it? That was how some of the trailer on flat car business was handled at that time. It was just shoved in the middle of the train, and it was in the early 70s they started realizing they needed to run special intermodal only trains, such as the Pacific Zip. And we'll see the Pacific Zip later, as well as in some of my previous videos.
Burr, do you have a card that goes behind these Interbay cars?
What do you do?
Auburn transfer is now leaving Interbay. Yay. On, I'll check.
Would you like a clearance?
Yes, please. I'm still in yard limits, I'm still okay.
Okay. Well, in that case,
That's a
the way
Interbay
headed to Bay side.
Oh, good. Interbay side on main 2.
Good. That's the oil
For the man.
Yeah,
All right.
good.
Where are you having to meet here? Yard? This is ready to go. I think Robin's got somebody. Where are you at, Dave?
Oh, yeah, I told him we were gonna read this in the evening, so you're gonna
Just leave it.
If you're following all of that discussion, the operator of the departing Auburn-Everett transfer train was just getting a clearance from the dispatcher, while the Interbay yardmaster was getting ready to send another train out. So there comes the operator of the Auburn-Everett transfer, and we're just going to watch him come around the main line for a minute, just because it's fun and we can. The reason that he doesn't have a caboose is because that's a transfer train, and I think we allow that to run without a caboose, I believe. There are usually arguments about whether or not a train needs a caboose. Mostly they do, but sometimes a transfer run between 2 yards doesn't require it. If nothing else, it gives us something to argue about, which is always fun. Well, I stand corrected. He has a nice red caboose on this train, and you'll have to wait till later in the video to see a train without a caboose. By the way, on the deck below Interbay, you see a train running into West Seattle and Legotown, which is Harbor Island. And I just recently did a video about the new track that's there, and this operator was able to shove some additional cars down into those tracks. I don't have video of that, but someday in the future we will.
Yeah, there's something very poetic about having Greg the industrial owner running all these mainline freights. I love it.
One of the other things you can notice is how slowly the trains are going. And that's not only realistic, but it makes the operating session last longer and allows people to relax and figure out what they need to do next when they come to the next town on their manifest. Now back to Interbay Yard. That's a nice SP&S torpedo tube Jeep 9 there that's pulling a train south. This might be a transfer train to the South Seattle Stacy Street yard from Interbay, which is a North Seattle yard. but now it looks like it's just still putting its train together. But with 3 engines like this switching, clearly they're just assembling their train and getting ready to leave. Another thing I want you to notice as we continue here is how difficult it is to get operators to pay attention to their bells, whistles, headlights, and so forth. This set of engines departing on the right has a rotating beacon going and the headlight on, which is terrific. But the engines we just saw before didn't have their headlight on, which is, not right. What can I say? There's a lot to concentrate on. I guess what I'm really trying to say is you don't achieve perfection in an operating session, you just have a good time. And if you forget to blow the whistle once in a while, you don't lose your job, you just get chewed out by me because I'm always asking people to do the right thing. And we want it to be as realistic as possible. Now here you see a set of engines went off to the engine terminal, and right away a through train came in from the south. You might have heard the bells ringing that were the grade crossing bells in the downtown Seattle area just off to the right of this photograph. This is a northbound freight. You can tell because it has empty flat cars for wood products from British Columbia. And there was also a wood ship car up there that's probably going to Scott Paper in Everett. That caboose is one of the brand new tangent cabooses that just came out a few months ago. They're very nice to look at and they run well. Now, as I expected, no sooner had that train come in than this southbound train left. There we go. We got the headlight on. Yay. That probably means this is the final shove, and the yardmaster would have put the caboose on the other end of the train. One of the fun things about the hobby is figuring out which freight cars belong in your era. Oh, that's a nice looking caboose too. That's an ex-CB&Q caboose. All right, now we're going to give you a demonstration of what it's like to switch cars in a big yard like this. Now, for starters, I would have dropped the cars right next to the switch. I wouldn't have pushed them all the way back on that track, but everyone does their job a little differently. Now, we're going to pull some additional cars, and you can see that the yardmaster on the far end is also drilling the tracks over there. It looks like the switcher is taking certain cars out of a cut of cars and putting them into 2 different trains. That's basically what's happening here. The red box car and the black depressed center flat car are going on that track all the way back. I don't know why he keeps shoving it all the way back. And then I think what he's going to do is pull the red caboose off the other train and then stick these cars that are on the yard lead into the back of this other train. Yeah, so here he's pulling the caboose. Hopefully the conductor isn't too annoyed with being jostled around like that. See, he's got to switch the switches. And I've got this speeded up 4 times normal so that we don't have to spend all day watching it. So there you see he inserted those 3 cars into the train, into the back of the train. And that's the kind of thing that a switchman does all day long. They move cars from one train to another or one track to another track, build up trains, break down trains. That's the fun of switching in a big yard like this. All right, back to our other view of Interbay. I wanted to show you a slightly different thing, which is that a yard also has industrial switching associated with it. And in this case, they're both facing and trailing point moves, if you know what that is. And that means that the engine, the switch engine, needs to be in the middle of the train so they can shove some cars to the left and some cars to the right. In this case, these tank cars are going to the Time Oil facility on the north end of Interbay Yard, and those hopper cars are going into Sabota Steel, which is on the south end of the yard. So this switcher will be able to, once he picks up all the cars he needs to take with him, he'll be able to go to the back of the yard on the left in this picture and do some switching. I don't have good footage of that, but I just wanted you to see that sometimes it really is done to have the engine in the middle of a cut of cars. And of course, in the real world, you would have a brakeman on each end of this train that would be flagging anybody and making sure that they could line the switches as needed and so forth. Once in a while, you have shorts and a problem with the locomotive or something like that. You have to touch the equipment. Not too often. See, these steel plates and pipes are all going to Sabota Steel, which was a prototype steel fabrication plant in the Interbay area. I can't show you the entire switching maneuver, but I just wanted you to see that this kind of thing happens in a big yard. Now, the next thing we're doing is celebrating that the Burlington yardmaster was able to take a run of the Fern Turn, the Ferndale Local, which ran from Burlington up to Ferndale and back. Actually, it's a little more complicated than that, but on this railroad, they take box cars and aluminum ingot cars up to the Ferndale plant. It's a beautiful Jeep 9 there on the train, and he's just coming back from having picked up the 4 cars that were loaded and ready to head off from the Alcoa aluminum plant there in Ferndale to various destinations across the United States. You can see that Southern Pacific car is probably headed down to California. And right now we're heading across the Samish River Bridge, which is at the entrance to Burlington. The box cars are all wide doors so they can get the aluminum ingots in there using forklifts. Very nice. This scene was built by Paul Scholes for his book, Building Realistic Scenery. And now we'll just look at what an operating session looks like. Below that bridge is my friend Andy Dupree, who's writing out train orders and keeping track of what's going on. You can see a monitor there that's monitoring the south staging yard. And you can see his magnetic board where he's trying to keep track of where the trains are. And then we have a couple of aisles full of operators trying to do their thing. The Stacy yard on the left and the Bayside yard in Everett on the right. There's the engine terminal in Everett. And on the right there is the Interbay yard, which we've been enjoying so far in this video quite a bit. And there's a couple of engines that are headed down to Stacy, probably to pick up a transfer run. I didn't stay long enough to find out, but I thought you'd like seeing them. And then this is a run of the Terry Avenue branch, which is behind the engine terminal. It's an old Northern Pacific trackage. And that switch that the cars are going through right now is the lead to the engine terminal, but there's another switch farther back that winds along the back wall and over to the spur that we call the Terry Avenue branch. And I think that's where those cars are going. This is another example of some industrial switching that has to take place in a big yard, in addition to making up and breaking down the mainline trains. Now, no sooner is that done than we have another train coming in from the south, this time with an SP&S F unit on the lead. I mention that because we'll be seeing a little bit of that train later, and I want you to recognize it. The yellow, orange, and green set of engines. This is a northbound through freight from California up to Vancouver, British Columbia, and you can see it's bringing some Boeing parts up from the contractors in the Los Angeles basin, an empty wood chip car, maybe some produce from California in these two cars. Oh, 3 cars, yeah. These cars may be empties going up to Burlington, where there was quite a berry packing operation. That would be my guess. And of course, the British Columbia Railway cars would be going back to British Columbia for loading.
Go in here to Scott Paper, which might block you later. Yeah, I might block you later, but hopefully we'll get those units out of there. Okay.
You don't have to have this many cars in a train to have a really fun operating session. But on this railroad, we're able to have trains up to about 25 cars long. So we do enjoy the complexity that brings with it. Well, just in time for that train to come to a stop, we have the Terry Avenue branch switcher coming back from their job and entering the main line at that same switch where we saw them depart. The Terry Avenue branch was quite a complicated area of industries in what's now called South Lake Union. And at this time of 1973, there were a number of industries in there that are interesting to switch. At the moment, we just have a staging track in there, but I hope to make a small shelf layout representing some of the industries there. Well, it didn't take long for this train to keep going. I wonder what we'll see it do next.
Gordon? Yeah, so we do have something that might be good for us. So this is important staging, track 3, I think I said, didn't I? Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep, so track 3. And that is just a run to Stacy Street.
Back in Interbay, we have a couple of engines that look like they might be retiring to the engine terminal or the house. as some of our yardmasters like to call it. But I think I'm overhearing from the chatter that actually these two engines are going to be pulling a transfer train over to Bayside Yard in Everett, because the yardmaster has a whole cut of cars that are billed for Everett, and they really want to get them out of there. That's one of the challenges with model railroads is they almost never have yards that are large enough to handle the number of cars that everybody wants to switch. So we end up in a fairly desperate situation where we just have to run transfer trains. And some of my friends who've worked for real railroads have told me that the same thing actually happens on real railroads, where once they get too many cars in a yard, they just will send some of them somewhere else just to free up some of the tracks and allow them to keep sorting cars in the yard as needed. I really enjoy this view from the Emerson Street Bridge. I enjoy it more on my model railroad than on the prototype because they have such a great view of the ladder here. This is the north ladder. It's fun to see the engine snake through the crossovers and watch things going on. Clearly, in this case, we're backing onto that cut of cars that has the Boeing tool cars on it. Speaking of jargon, model railroaders call those skybox cars, but the actual railroaders call them tool cars. I don't know why, but that's the story. Of course, you want to be as realistic as you can, so as soon as a real railroader tells me it's called a tool car, well, I start calling it that. I want to be cool, right? I have to say a cool tool car. Now look what we have. A southbound train is coming out of Bellingham on the upper deck. You see that? It looks like it has a tool car in the front of it too. Now keep an eye out for that train because we may see it later. It's got 4 engines on it. And it's coming down from Vancouver, British Columbia. And it'll have to work Burlington and then it'll have to stop in Everett, but eventually it'll get here. Now, meanwhile, back in Interbay, the switcher is coming out. And this little sequence here is also a good illustration of something. And you may hear the yardmaster say this directly. But basically what he's doing is some local industry switching. And he's going to get out of the way of the departing train. But first he's dropping off that gondola car before he spots the boxcar in the car repair shed. So this is just an illustration of how if you're a clever yardmaster, you can accomplish things even while you're waiting for trains to depart and kind of working around them. See, this train that is about to depart, he's talking to the dispatcher to get his clearance. And the yardmaster is just saying, well, I'm not going to wait for that. I'm going to do some more switching. And keep an eye out for this switcher because he's going to pull right past us, allowing this train to depart. And then we're going to see him spotting the car in the car repair shed.
All right, now you're putting it. All right. Yeah.
All right, we have liftoff, and we have headlights.
hard button.
It's good because the phone is
I need to sneak right in there.
You may notice these tool cars sometimes lean to one side or the other. These were made by a company called LBF, and I believe the molds have been purchased by Intermountain recently, so we may see these released again. But the LBF release had really strange trucks on them, so they tend to lean. So there's the switcher coming into the car repair shed area. Completely oblivious to the departing train. Very nice. I'm not sure what caused those two momentary shorts. I'll have to look into that because the engines are way over by the Salmon Bay Bridge. Well, we've been so busy with switching in the yard that it's become late afternoon. And in the late afternoon is when the Pacific Zip arrives. And as you know, if you've seen my other videos, the Pacific Zip was the Burlington Northern's first intermodal train that was actually operated at higher speeds than passenger trains because they really wanted to compete with trucks. And they tended to use high horsepower 6-axle diesels on these trains. Here we're pulling out of the Skycomish yard and racing down towards Seattle. I'm going to speed it up for today just so that we can get through all the material we have. So at the very beginning, when they started this out, they only ran a few cars, whatever they could sell. And that's what you see here. Just a handful of cars coming down the mountain, having crossed the Cascades with a single express boxcar at the end for very high priority merchandise. You can see down below the train, that's the Ballard Branch and some of the industries that are in there that we were discussing earlier in the video. Now here is the main line that the train just left, and the Sky Local is already taken it over and is busy switching its cars in the various industries in Skycomish. There's a gravel pit, a coal mine, and a logging operation. You can see up on the Skycomish yard tracks there's some empty hoppers that need to be taken over to the coal mine with a caboose on the end as the Pacific Zip races downhill towards Seattle. The operator of this Sky Local has a lot of switching to do up there, so he just gets out of the way whenever there's a through train that needs to happen. A few minutes later, here's the Pacific Zip going across the big steel trestle, physically located above the Delta Y on the model railroad, but it represents one of the many large steel trestles that are along the Burlington Northern main line up to Stevens Pass. These are typical piggyback loads from the era. If you want to see more footage of the Pacific Zip in action here, I recommend to you part 51 and part 33 of this series of model railroad operations videos. And I'll put the link to both of those in the description below, so I hope you enjoy. The express boxcar was used at the end of the train, and I'm told it always had a GN blue caboose. At the same time as the Pacific Zip was running down, there was a C415 switcher doing some work between Everett's Delta Yard and the Bayside Yard. In this case, he's drilling the Delta yard, and I didn't have a camera over there, so I can't show you anything more than this really cool sounding Alco. Railfanning, a switching maneuver, is a little frustrating when you can't see what's going on the other side, but this Alco is so beautiful, I thought we should just enjoy it for a minute. Very nice. Wait for it. Bang! Every good train video needs at least one good bang, right? One of my operators that was running a switch engine in the Stacy Street yard, which is south of Interbay, brought a knockoff of a GoPro camera and placed it on the track while he was working. So we got some really nice footage of a few moves. This is one cut that he was pushing around in the Stacy Street yard. That Conoco tank car was weathered by J.J. Johnson.
Hey, Larry? Larry, I'm going to tie up this lead for a minute with the coal train.
Okay.
And I acquired it from him when he was tearing down his layout. And that switcher is one of the new Rapido SW1500s. But looky here, there's a train coming by, and you may have heard me explaining why it was needed to clear the main and wait for this train. But this is the unit coal train that we saw earlier, only it's being run this second day since this was 3 different operating sessions in a row. So we ran the coal train twice, and this is the second run of it. I wouldn't necessarily show it to you again, except that I had this cool footage of it from the Stacy Street yard. A few of us are having debates about this unit coal train, exactly what it represents, whether it's realistic for 1973. When did the BN start shipping export coal out of British Columbia? So I thought we would speed this up because we don't want to watch a 26-car train where all the cars are the same. But it's kind of fun to watch that rotating beacon spin around too. There we go. That's more like it. So there's the caboose passing through Stacy. And I think the next step may be to go see it coming through Interbay. Cool shot though, isn't it? Yeah, so here's the coal train entering Interbay with some other switching taking place in the yard. And it's on the main line. And if you know anything about Interbay Yard, it only has one mainline track, and so the double track on both sides narrows down to a single track here. And for some reason, somebody forgot to flip that switch, so it stalled. They had to start it up again. Shame. See, there's the switch engine fooling around again. I really love the way you can just have people running engines all over the layout with DCC. Well, fortunately for you, I don't have any more footage of the coal train. But isn't that odd the way that the GN Blue U-boat has got its white marker lights left on? Somebody wasn't paying attention. Could have been me. I didn't notice it until I saw this camera footage. Now you can see as well as I can that there's some kind of a big train coming. And it's worth watching this train because I think it has 3 SD45s pulling it. I'm not sure about that yet, but I think you're going to see the same train at the very end of the video arriving in Skycomish. At this point, it's just come up from Portland and San Francisco, Los Angeles, exchanging cars with Seattle in this Interbay yard. It's a good guess that it'll have to have engine servicing. So they've just uncoupled the engines, and then the engines will move over to the house. Some switching action in the back of the yard while we wait for those engines to come off the train. All right, there come the engines. Now I think we'll see them back into the engine servicing facility. Like I said, they won't be there too long because they're going to be put back on the transcontinental train to haul over Stevens Pass.
I look at these and think, oh, wouldn't it be great to have them in Saturday blue. So what do you want me to clear here?
Well, if this weren't enough excitement in the yard, have you noticed that the unit coal train is now crossing over the top deck and entering the Bellingham staging yard? Cool. What? And now another arriving train. I would guess from the 6-axle nature of these locomotives, this is probably a manifest train arriving from the east into Interbay, and it's going to need to be broken up. But my camera ran out of battery right at that point, so we'll cut back to the Stacy Street GoPro shot for a minute. Seems to me we already saw this cut of cars, but it's in a different form now. And I believe it may be over in the Argo yard as opposed to Stacy Street.
You're good.
And for one of my favorite things, we've got trains moving on both decks at the same time. Now here we have 2 trains passing at Golden Gardens, just north of Seattle. And if you listen, you can hear the squealers on this train that's approaching. And remember, that's the
perfect
yellow, orange, and green train I told you to watch for earlier. It's now heading north, and with any luck, we may see it even further north than this. That retaining wall is just a bunch of wooden ties that I glued onto a flat surface. It looks really good.
I don't have the throttle, so I'm hoping I'm going where you want me to. Yeah, I'm going to be straight down. Oh. No, you're good.
What train is this?
Scared the crap out of me for a moment. Sorry about that.
Extra. 24, I think.
What is it? It's hitting the swifts.
Yeah, extra 24.
And we did so well with these 3 operating sessions that we even ran the jet job. The jet job was a very specialized switch job that went from Everett's Bayside yard up the 5% grade to the Boeing aircraft factory that made the 747s to deliver parts and supplies. And then it brought out aluminum scrap and other kinds of byproducts of building airplanes. Because of the direction of the uphill grade, they always kept the engine at the bottom of the train, the downhill end, which meant that they had to run caboose forward north into Everett. They had 3 locomotives that were specially equipped in their oil sumps to be able to handle the 5% grade, and they were 1799, 98, and 97. So I put the decals, or decals, if you live in Canada or Australia, but I put those decals on so that we would have the correct number for this switch job. And now, of course, we're entering and crossing this famous Squid Bridge. In a second, you should hear the squealer.
That'll do. Bring them ahead a bunch.
We run the jet job in the opposite as the prototype. We stage it up in the Boeing plant, and then we bring it down and send it into Bayside, exchange the cars that Bayside has ready for us, and then we run back into staging. It's just a compromise we have to make. Otherwise, we'd have all those cars sitting around all the time, and we would never be able to get rid of them except once in a while.
4 to go.
I'm not sure why I built that turntable, except every model railroader wants a turntable. It's kind of silly.
Here we go. One more.
Okay, remember that train with the yellow, orange, and green? Here it is. It's made it all the way up to the Bellingham staging. If I wasn't so restrained, I would set up a deal with my neighbor next door and run the tracks out that window and over to the next door neighbor. But never mind. I wanted to let you admire this weathering job on the Great Northern Blue boxcar that Brian Elchlip did recently. It's a beautiful job. Looks like it's really been out in the rain, but not too much, just enough to really look right. And here we have the jet job returning to the aircraft plant with a nice wave from the front end brakeman. And these are different cars from the ones we had before, although they look pretty similar. We've got a couple of presumably loaded tool cars and some empty gons, at least one that will be filled with scrap once the airplanes get made. No, we have 4 of these tool cars. Very nice. That's about a maximum length jet job for this railroad.
And if they let you play Yeah, I miss those days hanging out at the.
In just a minute, we'll back it up into the uphill spur.
Just listening to people shoot the bull about trains and eventually having to convince Steve to stop and sell me something.
Yeah. You want to ring this up, please?
Yeah.
So we pulled forward on the main, flipped the switch, and now we're backing into the staging yard for the Boeing spur with our 9 cars.
Okay, well, I could take it over.
Okay, everybody, it was good to see you. It was good to see you all. We'll hopefully see you guys sooner than later.
I'll tell Burr to look for
I'll be at Monroe with the.
You want to leave your tag behind there, Larry boy?
What's that? Oh, tag, yeah. You can do that. Use the next time out here.
He charges you $25 for the second one,
Oh, boy.
second and successive.
Thanks so much.
Thank you
Cheers.
guys. Talk to you later. See you later. Yeah.
Have a safe trip.
Sounds like somebody had to leave early.
Yes, Steve. So why did you have, oh, it was the one thing that was what you brought with you.
There's a method to my madness.
And there she goes. Well, as promised, those 3 SD45s have picked up the next Transcon, and they're charging up to Skycomish. We've got automobile loads, probably imports from Japan. And we've got a track waiting for us in the Skycomish staging yard. That F unit behind you is a camera car that I have set up to show the dispatcher what the status is of the tracks in the Skycomish yard. Who knew? And there's the same Sky Local work that we saw earlier. Above is the Milwaukee Road Limestone Junction branch. Those are very nice running scale trains, SD45s. I recommend them highly, especially if you need to run a Transcon in 1973. I guess they were real gas guzzlers, so they didn't use them too long because they were so expensive to operate. Oh, they had drive shaft problems too.
I wouldn't want to think. Check on the one slow trains.
And there's a little intermodal traffic that didn't make it onto the Pacific Zip yet. And wood ship traffic was very important to the Burlington Northern in 1973. So you often see those cars. And a GN caboose. Eventually I'll get all the cabooses relettered to BN, but that may take a while. So that's what I have for you as a summary of 3 long operating sessions. It was a lot of fun, and I've tried to boil it down to a reasonable length here. And now you saw everybody leaving, going up the stairs. And I'm going to come back down and close down the layout. You don't see that too often, but that's what happens at the end of an operating session is you have to shut it all down. Well, now I'm coming back downstairs to shut down the layout for the night, and maybe the week, who knows. Suddenly it's quiet. I've turned the lights off, the power off, put the lid on the chocolate bowl. Very important. Don't want the mice coming around looking for that chocolate. I hope you've enjoyed this video. It's been a lot of fun to put it together. It was a lot of fun to have the operating sessions. And you can see lots of videos on my channel of some of these specific trains like the Pacific Zip, the Jet Job, the Sky Local, and many more. And if you have any comments or questions, I hope you'll leave them in the comments section at the bottom of this video. And I'll leave links to some of the other videos of the specific trains there as well. And now, back to my action-packed narration of this riveting closing scene. As you saw, I just turned off the light over the dispatcher's desk. Off to the right, I just turned off the Corsi box air filter that I use to keep the basement air clean. And now I'm putting the stool down in order to get the windows done. You never knew you would be watching such a fascinating sequence of operations, did you? And there's one more window. That's the one we're going to run the trains out of to get to the neighbor's house. Fortunately for us, I forgot to turn off the video camera, which is what made this sequence possible for us to watch. And I think that does it. We got the layout shut down. Look how the light's shining on the railheads. Cool. And we'll see you next time. And for now, after a long one, this is Burr Stewart wishing you much fun with trains.